Hello, I'm Monsignor Jim Lasanti. Today on Personally Speaking, I'll be joined by Oscar and Grammy-winning composer-lyricist Stephen Schwartz, whose credits include the Broadway smash musicals Wicked, Godspell, and Pippin. We'll talk with him about how he handles critics and what it was like to work with the great composer Leonard Bernstein on Bernstein's Mass. Then later on in the show, I'll be joined by actress-singer Doris Day, long considered America's sweetheart. Doris will talk with us about her animal foundation and why she came to the aid of so many animals during Hurricane Katrina. Stay with us. In a career spanning over 4 decades, Stephen Schwartz has written such hit musicals as Godspell, Pippin, and Wicked. He's also contributed lyrics for a number of successful films, including Pocahontas, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and Prince of Egypt. In just a moment, we'll be joined on Personally Speaking by the Oscar and Grammy-winning composer-lyricist Stephen Schwartz, but before we do, I'd like to play a cut from a song called Fathers and Sons, a beautiful song from the musical Working that Stephen sings about the relationship between fathers and sons. Let's listen to that now.
I've heard a lot of songs saying, "Where you going, my son?" Now I know they're true. Boy, you never stop to think how fast the years run. Now they're taking you. I remember you was 3.5. Your ma and me, we'd sit there after things got quieted. We'd laugh at some new word you said, how tough you were to get to bed. We'd plan the night away, planning for our kid. I was your hero then. I couldn't do no wrong. As far as you were concerned, you thought I was the best of men. The tables hadn't turned, you hadn't learned how little time it takes. And daddies make mistakes. Seems to be that lately I've been thinking a lot. I think about my dad. Lots of funny things come back, thought I'd forgot. Now they make me sad.
Joining me now, I'm so pleased to welcome to Personally Speaking the Oscar and Grammy-winning composer-lyricist Stephen Schwartz. Stephen, let's go back to something wonderful. Before we came on, we played a song of yours, and I want to start with it. And it's not from Godspell, though we're going to talk about the New York production of Godspell. It's called Fathers and Sons. And,
okay.
And I loved it when I
Thank you.
saw it many years ago in Working. Tell me how that song came to be written.
Well, it's the only song in Working that isn't directly derived from an interview. And it's a song that I wrote for the show. There were multiple songwriters who contributed works to the show. But this was one of the ones that I wrote. And it's kind of based on some things that the steelworker said, and we include some of the steelworker's monologue in the interview, but I actually wrote a lot about my own son and my own father.
Okay.
And I thought it was too personal to include in the show. I wasn't really planning to do it, but then my collaborators prevailed upon me to put it into the show.
Yeah, and I hadn't I hadn't heard you sing before, but this version we played obviously is you singing it.
Oh, okay. I know where that's from.
And it's wonderful.
Thank
it's
you.
because you obviously do it with a great deal of feeling, you know. But that's
I try and compensate with phrasing for the fact that I don't have the best voice in the world.
it sounded great to me, so
Thank
I love.
you.
I'm trying to think who did sing it in the original working.
In the Broadway show was actually Bob Gunton.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, all right. One of my friends from back then. This goes to another topic of success. A friend that I made back then was a guy named Matt Landers, who was in your
Matt's
show.
so great.
He's such a nice man. But I'm thinking back because I'm not even sure what year I saw that show, but he was in it, as was Patti LuPone.
Right.
Now, Matt goes on. He has a limited career, and now he's up in Utica taking care of his elderly parents. Patti goes on to world fame. How do you deal with the promise and the heartbreak when you're dealing with actors?
I don't really think about that. I just their past doesn't really pertain to anything we're doing. We're just in the present,
the moment,
in the moment and in the present with whatever project we're doing. Obviously, they bring their heartaches and their wounds with them.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times, more often than not, that informs their work in a positive way. I mean, for instance, with the role of Elphaba in Wicked, we say that she really needs to bring, the actress who plays her really sort of needs to bring a wounded quality to the role.
Right. And do you get to do much personal counseling with the actors, or do you keep it all professional?
We keep it all professional.
Yeah.
It's the director's job to do the personal counseling to the extent that it's required.
You create the thing and they have to interpret, but you let the director be the person who personally walks them through it.
Absolutely.
All right.
There's really a protocol in the theater that everything gets channeled through the director in terms of dealing with the actors, and that's something I respect a lot. Of course, now my son is a director, so
Right.
I have to particularly respect the rules.
Well, speaking of Scott, I wanted to ask you, when you go to see his stuff, is it any easier or tougher to offer constructive evaluation to someone when he's not just the director of the play, but also your son?
It's easier.
Is it?
Because we have such a long history of doing that with and for one another. And both of us know that neither has any kind of agenda other than wanting for the show to succeed. There's nothing else going on,
Right.
except even subconsciously, except that we both want the work to come off. He's extremely accustomed to my coming to readings that he's doing or early previews and giving thoughts about it, and as well as I run, because he's so dramaturgically smart, I tend to run stuff that I'm working on by him, and he's made extremely useful suggestions to me on various projects over the years.
Do you remember, he has this father who's this world-famous composer, but do you remember when you started to see signs in Scott that he was actually going to follow in your path into this world of theater?
Oh, I can tell you exactly what happened. He was always interested as a kid, and he used to walk around the swimming pool at our house sort of talking to himself and gesturing, and he would direct the neighborhood kids in various things, and then did the usual thing of being sort of a child actor for a while when he was young enough that that's what he could do. But then he was always interested in directing, and I remember that I was in England doing a project, and I got a call from my wife, and she said that she had seen something that he had directed in high school. In 10th grade, he directed Peter Shaffer's Black Comedy. And she called me and said, well, I know what your son is going to do for a living. And she told me about this, and I said, oh, that's so cute, and how nice that he got the opportunity. And she said, you are not hearing me. I'm telling you, this is it. And
Really?
of course, she was
In 10th
prescient
grade,
about that.
yeah. Now, for our listeners, many of you come to New York, and not just to New York, around the country, and you all want to see Wicked, which is a great play, but great musical. I would hope that you'll come to New York and see Godspell, which is Stephen's creation. Stephen, why now, 2011, 2012, are we bringing Godspell back, and what's the response so far?
Well, I've been very happy with the response, and it seems to be sort of building this word of mouth about the show and this particular production, which I like enormously. I think the director, Danny Goldstein, and the choreographer, Chris Catelli, did an amazing job with it. The cast is just sort of scarily talented. They're amazing and extremely energetic and very, very funny, and they all sing astonishingly well. I think that, sort of what this guy, Jesus, who's I guess they say the name Jesus in the show once or twice,
yeah,
but
they do,
but basically, he is this sort of charismatic figure who comes into the middle of a group of people who can't agree on anything and can't get along and don't want to listen to one another, and kind of imparts some lessons about living together. And when you actually listen to what he had to say, and all the lines are basically derived from the Bible.
Right,
There's nothing
right.
actually written. I know it doesn't seem that way when you see the show because the way it's done is so improvised.
Right.
But it's basically right out of mostly the Gospel according to St. Matthew. There's some things from Luke, and I think there are one or two stray things from John, but mostly it's Matthew. And if you listen to what he said and then think about some of the things that are being done and professed in his name now, it's sort of staggering. I mean, basically what he says is always treat others as you would have them treat you. Golden rule. And anything that you did not do for one of your brothers or sisters here on earth, you did not do for me. Yeah. And frankly, whatever people believe or espouse, my feeling is if everybody would just do that, it would be a much, much better world to live in.
I was a couple of years ago with a friend of mine, Rabbi Nathaniel Schwartz, doing a wedding, and it was a Catholic Jewish wedding, and I said to him, are you going to be all bent out of shape if we mention the name of Jesus during the ceremony? And he said no. He said no self-respecting Jew should be offended by Jesus because he said and did wonderful things. He said we get a little nervous when you call him Jesus Christ because that means he's the Messiah and we miss the boat. But he said, but the person did and said wonderful things. None of us can disagree on that. And that's really what you're saying too.
It is. And Godspell, sometimes we get criticized for it by people who want to see a resurrection, et cetera. And we really don't deal with the divinity,
right.
the question of divinity in the show at all.
Yeah.
And you can bring your own beliefs about that to the show.
Right.
But that's not really what it's about. And in a way, I think that's what makes it special. It's really about what he said,
and
how that can cause people to become a community. I know this all sounds very serious when we talk about it, and
it's a fun night. It's totally fun.
People who know about Godspell know that it's extremely funny and very high energy, but underneath it, that's really what it's about.
Having sat through 4 million amateur productions, I was so delighted to go to Broadway and see these incredibly talented actors put on the performances that they did. What was your experience of, or your knowledge of, this person, Jesus, when you were given this assignment? You were a kid in your 20s yourself.
Well, I mean, obviously you can't grow up in America without knowing the basic story and the whole passion story. What I did not know were the parables, which is what, I mean, obviously I had heard about the prodigal son and the Good Samaritan and all those things that have become just part of our lingua franca, but I didn't actually know some of those stories. So it was very enlightening to me in both senses of the word to come to them and, again, experience what those stories were actually saying.
Yeah. Did you get any grief from the other end of the spectrum? Are there people who are Jewish who would say you shouldn't be dabbling in Christianity?
Oh, sure. I still get grief about that. A friend of mine, a Jewish woman, brought her mother to see the show, and her mother said, "Well, has Stephen converted? Is that why he's doing the show?" So there's, you know what you're always going to get grief, whatever you do. Obviously, dealing with this subject matter, there are always going to be people who have some kind of personal, take on it,
right.
And sometimes find things objectionable. It's interesting to me that Godspell has become more controversial than when it first came out, because of the rise of fundamentalism,
right,
I think,
right.
than when it first appeared. I mean, when it first appeared, it was, kind of universally accepted and done in schools all over the place and performed for 2 popes and,
right.
kind of across the board. But in more recent times, there have been certain schools that have tried to do it and gotten protests from, kind of fundamentalist parents who feel that it's not sufficiently respectful enough because it dares to be funny.
Bring some joy into the whole story. Mention
God forbid you should
Don't
have some
you dare.
joy.
I think for many spiritual people, well-intentioned, they think that seriousness or glumness, I call it, is a sign of God's presence. And I think, in fact, God's presence should be reflected in joy.
Well, that was actually what triggered John Michael Teblak, the original director and creator of Godspell, who was...